Welcome to our second service at Kings Highway Christian Church. I'm James Monk, one of the elders here at the church, speaking for Steve today. Today's July 2nd, 2 days till our country's 247th birthday. What do you think those people who wrote our Declaration of Independence and were planning the birth of our country, think they were feeling a lot of fear? How about today? How much fear are we experiencing in our society today? So many things that are going on. One of the biggest that I think is fear of further division among people. Almost 250 years after the birth of our country, we're still experiencing racism. We have division because of bigotry, and we have division over politics. Ugh. You know, it's natural for us to experience fear. We know we all feel it from time to time. And, it's an emotion that guards us against danger. But letting fear grip us and influence our lives on a regular basis can rob us of our joy and make us forget to be grateful for what is good in our lives. Fear, when left unchecked, can be a gateway to judging others, can lead to reacting rather than responding, can lead to vitriol and even hatred. Now, the remedy for this fear is love, which seems like an obvious answer. It's almost a cliche response, but we're going to dig deeper into that. Because this was Paul's response for the church in Corinth when he wrote the love chapter in 1 Corinthians chapter 13. But before we read that, let's talk about what was going on in the city of Corinth. It was a great commercial city in southern Greece. All traffic was going north and south in the country, passed through Corinth. And most of the east-west traffic did too. Vanity Fair of the ancient world, the Bridge of Greece, and the Lounge of Greece were among the nicknames or monikers for Corinth. Corinth was home to what's called the Isthmian Games, which, like the Olympics, is a days-long festival of athletic competition. In fact, the Isthmian Games were second in prestige only to the Olympics. Corinth was a very rich and populous city. If any of you from your childhood remember reading the book Jason and the Argonauts, legend has it that the Argo ship that Jason sailed on when he was hunting for the Golden Fleece, that it was built in Corinth. How does Corinth compare with what we face today? Let's talk about some of the issues that Corinth experienced and see how much that affects our communities today. Corinth, despite all its great attributes, was also a city known for drunken and immoral debauchery. On the hill of the Acropolis stood the temple of Aphrodite, where 1,000 sacred prostitutes presided. Every evening they would come down from the Acropolis and ply their trade. Many traders who came through Corinth brought their own vices as well. Corinth became known not just as a city of wealth and luxury, but also for filth. And the early church in Corinth had its own troubles. Told you a lot of traders and sailors came through Corinth, where a lot of them settled down eventually in Corinth. And many of them were members of this early church. But a lot of these people came from a pagan background. Instead of being united, this early church was itself divided into various factions. Each one consumed with their own wisdom, bragged about their knowledge of the scriptures, boasted of their gifts of speech, how well they could speak to a crowd. They seriously argued and debated over who had more faith among them. They boasted on who was the one who gave more to charity. They even argued on who was eventually going to be the biggest martyr among them. They were focused on their pride and on the fear of the other faction's influence on the church and the community. They were not at all focused on the sheer grace of God, and there certainly was love lacking in their ministry. How much does this sound familiar to what we're facing today? Yeah, we have all the big issues that we're always facing: drugs, violence, sex, in mass media or otherwise. But we have other reasons of division among our population: economics, politics, views on society. These all divide us today. We have to acknowledge that for better or worse, there are some everlasting changes in our society right now. It may give you comfort to know that many historians and sociology experts often predict there's a slight paradigm shift every 30 to 40 years where there's different approaches to culture and politics and religion. But until then, what we need right now is endurance, and we need to show grace. This requires us to first have love. It's really that simple. I didn't say easy, but the concept is simple. Paul tells us that love is above all other gifts when it comes to serving our Lord and our fellow neighbor. 1 Corinthians chapter 13. If I could speak all the languages of earth and of angels, but didn't love others, I would only be a noisy gong or a clanging cymbal. If I had the gift of prophecy, and if I understood all of God's secret plans and possessed all knowledge, and if I had such faith that I could move mountains, but didn't love others, I would be nothing. If I gave everything I have to the poor, and even sacrificed my body, I could boast about it. But if I didn't love others, I would have gained nothing. Love is patient. Love is kind. Love is not jealous or boastful or proud or rude. It does not demand its own way. It is not irritable, and it keeps no record of being wronged. It does not rejoice about injustice, but rejoices whenever the truth wins out. Love never gives up, never loses faith, is always hopeful, and endures through every circumstance. Prophecy and speaking in unknown languages and special knowledge will become useless, but love will last forever. Now, our knowledge is partial and incomplete, and even the gift of prophecy reveals only part of the whole picture. But when the time of perfection comes, these partial things will become useless. When I was a child, I spoke and thought and reasoned as a child. But when I grew up, I put away childish things. Now we see things imperfectly, like puzzling reflections in a mirror. But then we will see everything with perfect clarity. All that I know now is partial and incomplete. But then I will know everything completely, just as God now knows me completely. 3 things will last forever: faith, hope, and love. But the greatest of these is love. Now, in these first 3 verses, Paul states one may have the gifts to speak different languages, to prophesy or preach. But without love, these gifts serve no purpose than to serve themselves. To further explore why love is the answer to our fear and division, let's take a deeper dive into these 15 characteristics of love that Paul just spoke about. The first 2, love is patient, love is kind. How is this shown? When a man is slow to anger, however wrong we believe someone to be, however disparaging or hurtful, we must exercise the same patience that God exercises with us. When I was going to school at LSUS in my early 20s, I was also working part-time at Old Navy. And I came home from work one day and complained to my dad about an extremely rude customer that I had to deal with. She was being belligerent over having to wait in line in the dressing room during a busy day. Finally, after she just kept going on and on, I lost my cool and I snapped at her. She cried. Manager was called. I got reprimanded. When I got home, I told my dad about it, and he said, "Son, I know some people can be unreasonable, but you just have to turn the other cheek." And I said, "Well, Dad, I only have 2 cheeks." And he said, "Son, when you act like a horse is behind, you really have 4 cheeks." The next 2, love is not jealous. Love is not boastful. God has created us all differently. God blessed some of us academically. God created some of us with natural athletic ability. God made some of us with great problem-solving skills. God made some of us good-looking. And then he made the rest of you. Sometimes nice guys do finish last. Sometimes we don't get what we deserve, no matter how hard we work. Sometimes other people who we think are less deserving always seem to get the breaks. When we exhibit biblical love, we do not act jealous or envious to such people. Likewise, those of us who have been fortunate enough to have great fortune, experiences, or outcomes in our endeavors should remember to be humble ourselves, because it's been shown that our fortunes can flip-flop at any time for any reason. Love is not proud. Love is not rude. Like not being boastful, this reminds us to remain humble and put ourselves above others. Napoleon, at the height of his power, he had always advocated for the sanctity of the home and for public worship for others. When confronted about his attitude, he said, "I am not like other men. The rules of morality do not apply to me." Well, we know eventually what happened to Napoleon at the end of his reign. But speaking of love not being proud, how many relationships, marriages, have deteriorated because one or both spouses dug their heels in and refused to communicate and compromise in the face of conflict? How many friendships have been lost? How many churches have had to close or disband? What is Paul saying to the church in Corinth? What is Paul saying to us? Love does not insist on its own way. There's multiple ways to interpret this. Selfishness, stubbornness, being inconsiderate of others' feelings or viewpoints. Bible scholar William Barclay helps illustrate this point by declaring that there are 2 types of people in the world: those who insist on their privileges and those who remember their responsibilities. Now, since we are a functioning society, I think it's safe to say that at least some of us usually remember our responsibilities. But we do struggle to be a harmonious society. And one of those reasons can easily be attributed to us dwelling on what privileges we have and what privileges we think we should have. When this happens, we drift away from gratitude. When this happens, we drift away from Christian love. When this happens, we open ourselves and those around us to resentment and eventually hatred. Love is not irritable. Now, we all do get irritated with things from time to time. Some of us even have short fuses and can lose our temper. Now, anger and irritability in themselves are not bad. They're normal human emotions. It's how we handle and display those emotions that make them good or bad. When we lose our temper at those who refuse to see our side of a conversation, or at those who post something on social media that we fundamentally disagree with, do we honestly believe we're going to change their mind by simply lashing out at them? Or are we simply just adding more fuel to a divisive fire? About a year from now, we're going to have another election season upon us. So once again, social media will become a a battleground of right-wing and left-wing supporters, each posting propaganda in a futile, and I stress the word futile, attempt to convince the other side to change their vote. Now look, it's our privilege, it's our right and our privilege as Americans to disagree with each other on politics and on issues that affect our community. However, it is our responsibility as Christians to disagree in a civil and, yes, even loving way. I'm going to say that again and let it sink in. It is our responsibility as Christians to disagree in a civil and loving way. The ninth trait, love keeps no record of wrongs. This may cause some of you to think of the adage of forgive but do not forget. It's natural for us to remember being hurt by others, whether it occurred just recently or a long time ago. Many of us may still carry some trauma on some sort of action that was carried out against us, or some terribly hurtful words spoken to us by someone else. Now, while we do not forget, we can still forgive. And forgiving is not for their benefit, but it's for our own, because we can still show love and refuse to give in to the resentment, or worse, use our hurt to take it out on others. I'm going to describe a pattern here and see if this sounds familiar to you, current events or anything. Someone from Group A has said or done something to really hurt me. So later on down the road, I'm going to be proactive and I'm going to be hostile towards people in Group B because they share similar characteristics to people in Group A. Does that sound familiar? Now, every one of us, because we are Christians, have been a part of Group B. But how many of us have also been a part of Group A? How many of us have also been the person hurt by Group A and later took it out on Group B? We are tasked by Christ to break this pattern by forgiving and to seek forgiveness from those that we may have wronged. Love does not rejoice about injustice. Love rejoices in truth. It's one of the strange traits of human nature to take enjoyment in the news of the misfortune of others. Hollywood gossip magazines and websites capitalize on this by catching celebrities, bad news that's happened to them or in their less than sparkling state. Mainstream media also capitalizes on this. Some of us in this church cling to the words spoken on Fox News, CNN, MSNBC, NPR, what have you, any news channel or website. We cling to those words as gospel, when in fact the reality is that every one of those news agencies has a certain angle that they take to rile up the viewers, because riled up viewers is more ratings and revenue for them. Christian love excludes this human malice and finds no pleasure in others' misfortunes. Now, another quirk of human nature is that we sometimes do not want the truth revealed, especially when it involves our own misfortunes, or even worse, our own mistakes and sins. As difficult as it is, Christian love has nothing to conceal and always revels in the truth. These last four: love never gives up. Love never loses faith. Love always hopes. Love always endures through every circumstance. Now, this is pretty self-explanatory. Love is indeed limitless. We as mere mortals have a limited capacity to think clearly. We have a limited capacity to exert ourselves physically. We have a limited capacity to even listen. But we all have the capacity to love forever. This has already been demonstrated for us. Jesus Christ, God in human form, sacrificed himself and was crucified for us. These are indeed challenging times, and even greater challenging times may indeed be ahead. But with our faith, there is light at the end of the tunnel, especially if that light comes from our love shining through. For some final words, let's remember Paul's final words at the end of 1 Corinthians 13. 3 things will last forever: faith, hope, and love. But the greatest of these is love. Let us also not forget Jesus' words in Matthew 22, verses 37 through 39. You must love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, and all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment. A second is equally important. Love your neighbor as yourself. It's that simple. It's not easy, but it really is simple. Love the Lord and love others. Imagine our society. Imagine our world when we follow these words. Amen.